I knew something was wrong the second I opened my front door. The air in my historic Denver brownstone was full of dust, hanging thick and white like a blizzard had blown in from the inside. Then I heard it. The heavy thud of a sledgehammer. The shatter of glass collapsing. Wood splintering. My life breaking apart in real time. I stepped into the hallway and froze. My suitcase slipped out of my hand and hit the floor with a dull thump. Straight ahead, through the open archway, my father and my brother were standing in what used to be my sunroom. My favorite room in the house, swinging sledgehammers into the glass walls like they were knocking down a shed. Safety glass burst and rained down. White plaster exploded. My plants, some of which I'd grown from cuttings I'd carried like treasure, were crushed under boots and debris. My father caught sight of me in the doorway but didn't stop. He laughed. Actually laughed. Turned to my brother and said, loud enough for me to hear over the destruction, "She's not going to throw a pregnant woman out. She can't. She wouldn't dare." He was wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I want to know who's here with me while I tell this. My name is Natalie, and in my line of work, restoring old structures, you learn something important. When a building is compromised, you don't stand in the rubble and cry. You assess the damage. You stabilize what you can. You remove what's dangerous. So I did the same thing with my life. I stepped back out into the winter air, letting the door close behind me. The cold slapped my face, cleared my head. My hands were steady as I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Emergency services. What's your emergency? I need to report a felony break-in and property destruction in progress, I said. My voice sounded almost detached, like I was reading off a report. 2 men have forced their way into my home and are demolishing my property with sledgehammers. I am outside and safe. They don't know I've called. The dispatcher asked for my address. I gave it. Answered every question calmly. Then I stood on the sidewalk and watched through the front window as 2 patrol cars slid to the curb, lights off at first, silent. A few seconds later, blue and red exploded across the snow, turning my front yard into something out of a crime show. Officers ran up my steps and slammed through my door, shouting commands that cut straight through the crash of the hammers. Police. Drop the weapon. Down. On the ground. Now. My father finally stopped swinging. He didn't look scared. He looked irritated, like they'd interrupted him in the middle of some important personal project. My brother Austin just stood there, frozen, his eyes huge, his sledgehammer still half raised as reality hit him. This wasn't a family dispute. This was a crime scene. I watched through the window as they were pushed to the floor, hands yanked behind them, zip ties clicking into place. The officer at the door waved me inside. When I stepped into my foyer, it was like walking into a snow globe that had been smashed. Fine white dust floated in the air. It coated my vintage rugs, my bookshelves, my furniture. It settled in my throat like chalk. The sunroom, the glass-walled space I'd saved for years to build, was now an open, gaping wound in the back of the house. You could see straight out to the yard. Winter wind came roaring in. "This is a misunderstanding," my father said from the floor, forcing a chuckle. He rolled onto one hip as if he thought he still had authority here. "Officer, we're her family. She knows we're here. We're just doing some work." The officer turned to me. "Ma'am." I looked at my father, at my brother, then back at the officer. "I have no idea why these men are in my house," I said. "They do not have my permission to be here. They have caused extensive damage. I want them arrested." My father's face went from flushed to nearly purple. "Natalie, stop this nonsense right now," he snapped. "You are embarrassing yourself. Tell them we're allowed to be here. We're your family." "I've already told the truth," I said. "They broke in. They destroyed my property. I want to press charges." I showed the officers my ID, the deed to the house, my boarding pass with the timestamp from the flight I'd just gotten off of. I hadn't been in this state for 3 days. The officer's jaw tightened. He turned back to my father. "You are under arrest for felony criminal mischief and unlawful entry," he said. "You have the right to remain silent." As they hauled my father and brother up, dust still in their hair, my mother's car screeched into the driveway. She ran up the front steps, eyes wild, hair half done, shouting my name. "How could you do this?" she screamed when she saw them in handcuffs. "They're your father and your brother." I looked past her, through the jagged opening where my sunroom wall used to be. This wasn't just property damage. This was a full-scale invasion. My home wasn't just a building. It was my armor. The one place in the world I had poured myself into completely. They hadn't just broken a wall. They'd broken into me. I turned to the officer closest to my mother. "She drove them here," I said. "She knew what they were doing. She's part of this." The officer hesitated. "I didn't." "She is not some innocent bystander," I said. "She is an accomplice." They cuffed her too. Seeing my mother's wrists pulled behind her back should have hurt. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Like a heavy wet blanket had finally been peeled off my chest. I stood in the wreck of my own home, cold air ripping through the open wall, dust in my lungs, sirens bouncing off the brick outside. And for the first time in a long time, I felt terrifyingly, absolutely free. After the cruisers pulled away, the house went quiet. Not peaceful. More like the heavy silence you get in an empty church after a funeral. I walked slowly through the debris. Glass crunched under my boots. Fragments of plaster crumbled into white powder when I brushed past. The wind from outside whistled through the missing wall, bringing in the sharp smell of snow and exposed earth. This brownstone wasn't just an address. 5 years earlier, it had been a rotting, sagging mess. People told me I was insane for buying it. "Just tear it down," they said. "It's not worth saving." I disagreed. I spent nights on my hands and knees, sanding original hardwood floors until my skin split. I spent weekends at salvage yards, hunting for the right era-specific fixtures. I repointed bricks myself, layer by layer. I restored this house the way some people nurse an injured animal back to health, carefully, obsessively, with more love than sense. While I did that, my parents called it Natalie's money pit. They laughed at my little project. They told me I was wasting my time. And yet, when they needed something, storage space, a spare room, use of my washer and dryer, that money pit was suddenly very convenient. Now they'd come with hammers, and aimed them straight at the part of the house that felt most like my heart. I stepped into my office, the only room that seemed untouched, closed the door, sat down at my desk. I didn't cry. I approached the day like I would a diseased tree on a job site. Identify the rot. Isolate it. Cut it out. I opened my laptop. Pulled up a spreadsheet I'd created and then shoved into a digital drawer months earlier. The file was named, bitterly, Austin Fund. I clicked it open. Row after row of numbers stared back at me. Rent I'd covered, just this once. Credit cards paid off so he could start fresh. Seed money for business ideas that never made it off the napkin. Emergency cash for car repairs, legal fees, mysterious bills. Total at the bottom. $88,000. The sight of it made me lean back in my chair. $88,000. I scrolled, watching the dates tick by. Years of transfers. So many times I'd told myself, this will be the last time. He'll get it together after this. Why? Why had I done it over and over when some part of me knew perfectly well he was never going to pay me back? I stared at that number and finally admitted the truth to myself. It wasn't because I believed in his ideas. It wasn't because he'd convinced me that this time was somehow different. I kept writing checks because I was trapped in a very dangerous kind of thinking. I'd already invested so much in time, in money, and hope that admitting it was a loss felt unbearable. If I walked away, it would mean the first 10,000. The first 30. The first 50 had all been for nothing. That my love and loyalty toward my brother were a bad investment. So I did what people do at casinos when they've already lost too much. Kept putting chips down, praying for a miracle. Except this wasn't a game. It was my future. I looked up at the hole in my house, at the mess they'd created in less than an hour. They hadn't just trashed my property. They'd shattered the story I'd been hiding behind. The $88,000 was gone. The version of my brother I'd been trying to buy into existence was gone. The version of my parents who just didn't understand money was gone. All that was left was my house, wounded but still standing. And a choice. I closed the spreadsheet, opened a new document, named it one word: evidence. Then I started typing. The date, the time the flight had landed, the 911 call reference, the officers' names, the statements my father had made, the exact damage to the structure as I saw it. This wasn't a family disagreement anymore. It was a criminal matter. And I was done pretending otherwise. My parents and Austin posted bail by the following morning. I knew, because my phone lit up on my desk like it was possessed. Buzzing. Buzzing again. Buzzing nonstop. I let it. When it finally stopped vibrating itself toward the edge, I picked it up. Dozens of messages from my mother. No, we're sorry. No, let's talk. Just photos. Grainy black and white ultrasound images. A tiny curled up form. Measurements in the corner. Baby Vance written in neat text. Then the message. This is your niece. She was supposed to sleep in that room. You threw her out into the snow. My stomach flipped. It was strategic, I'll give her that. They'd moved on from hammers to something they thought would be stronger. Weapons made of guilt. I opened Facebook. My mother had already posted a long, emotional status. Please pray for our family, it began. Our daughter Natalie had us arrested for trying to help her brother build a nursery. She kicked us and our unborn grandchild out into the cold. We are devastated and heartbroken. Family is supposed to be everything. Hundreds of reactions already. How could she? That's evil. A baby? In winter. God sees everything. Karma will come for her. My brother had slid into my DMs. My lawyer says I can sue you for emotional trauma, he wrote. You terrified Olivia. If anything happens to the baby because of your little stunt, it's on you. I put the phone down and went to stand by the shattered wall. The snow outside was falling in gentle flakes. It looked peaceful. Inside, the cold bit straight through my clothes. The guilt pressed on my chest like a weight. It was just a room. It was just money. Maybe I should have let them have it. Maybe I was being cruel. I exhaled slowly and did what I always do when a structure is under stress. I examined it. I went back to my phone. Reread every message, this time like they were evidence in a case. Fear, obligation, guilt. They were counting on all three to drag me back into line. Fear of being seen as a monster. Obligation to the magical concept of family. Guilt over a baby who had nothing to do with any of this. My mother wasn't actually asking for help. She was daring me to stick to my boundary. My brother wasn't seeking reconciliation. He was threatening me, hoping my terror of public shame and internalized good daughter training would make me fold. They were banking on one belief, that I would rather be used than be hated. They were wrong. I lifted my phone, took a screenshot of my mother's post, then a screenshot of the police incident report. I didn't post anything. I just saved them into my evidence folder. Then I opened my contacts and called my contractor. I need a damage assessment, I said. Documented. Pictures. Written report. Today, if possible. If my family wanted to turn this into a war, fine. But it would be fought with facts, not tears. The next day, I walked through my home with a man named Marcus, an independent contractor who specialized in damage assessments and historic restorations. He wasn't interested in my drama. He was interested in numbers. He ran his hand over the broken studs where my glass wall had once been anchored, tapped on the remaining plaster, shook his head. This isn't as simple as patching drywall, he said. This house is over 100 years old. You can't just slap new stuff over old and call it done. You're going to need proper restoration work. How much? I asked. He scribbled something on his clipboard. With materials and labor, permits, you're looking at 50, maybe 60,000. Could go higher once we start and find more issues. I wrote it down. Added it to my growing spreadsheet of costs. Emergency board up, heat loss, temporary housing if needed, my time. Then he paused. He had picked up one of the documents I'd grabbed from the county recorder's office that morning, printouts I'd requested out of pure instinct. "Where's the permit attached to this?" he asked, frowning. "I didn't approve any work," I said. "There is no permit." "Not for the construction," he said, tapping the paper. "For the loan. This work order references a home improvement loan number. It says a $50,000 line was opened against this property last month." See? My brain stuttered. "Loan," I repeated. I hadn't taken out a loan. The house was paid off. Paid in full. That was one of the few things in my life I'd been fiercely proud of. I took the document from his hand. It was a copy of a loan agreement from a local credit union. My name at the top, Natalie Vance. My address. The amount, $50,000. And at the bottom, a signature that looked very, very much like mine. Date 3 weeks back. 3 weeks ago, I was standing in a greenhouse in London, presenting a design proposal to a panel of architects. I had the passport stamp and travel receipts to prove it. My heart kicked into high gear. This wasn't just arrogance. This wasn't just family helping themselves. This was another level. I looked at the line labeled Witness. There was my father's name. Clear as day. Everything snapped together with a sickening click. They hadn't just broken my wall. They had walked into a bank with forged paperwork, pretended to be me, signed my name, and put my house up as collateral to pull out $50,000. All before they ever picked up a hammer. They mortgaged my work, my security, my future, to fund a nursery for my brother and his girlfriend. I looked at Marcus. "Document everything," I said. My voice was low and shaking with a cold kind of fury. "Every nail, every cracked tile, every compromised joint. I'm going to need all of it." When he left, I added that loan document to my evidence folder. The whole family dispute narrative? Dead. This was fraud. And I was done pretending it was anything less. 2 days after that, my father called. Not yelling. Not crying. He sounded measured. Almost reasonable. "We'd like to sit down and talk," he said. "There's no need for all this legal nonsense. Austin just wants to pick up some of his tools from the house. We're prepared to pay for the repairs if you agree to drop the charges." He made it sound like he was extending a favor. Like he was the one being generous. I listened. Then I said, "Fine. Let's meet." I gave him an address downtown. Neutral territory. A building with meeting rooms you can rent by the hour. They arrived on time. My father walked in first, like he owned the place. My mother close behind, mouth tight. Austin trailed them, still wearing that arrogant half-smile he'd worn his whole life. He had brought Olivia too. She looked exhausted. Her coat hung open over her pregnant belly, one hand resting protectively there. Her eyes darted between us like a trapped animal's. They filed into the conference room. My father took the chair at the head of the table, automatically assuming the position of command. "We're glad you've come to your senses," he began. "Now, if we can just sign something simple to make all this go away." I didn't sit. I stayed by the door, laid one sheet of paper on the glossy table, and slid it toward him. "What's this?" he asked, picking it up. "The home improvement loan," I said. "The one you witnessed. The one taken out in my name while I was in another country." Austin's smirk disappeared. My father went very still. "You forged my signature," I said quietly. "You stole my identity. You defrauded a bank using my house as collateral. That isn't a misunderstanding. That is a felony." My mother shot up out of her chair. "Natalie, please," she said. "We can fix this. We'll pay it back. We were just trying to." "No," I said. "You can't fix this. Because that loan agreement you're holding? The detectives in the next room already have a copy." Right on cue, the door behind me opened. 2 detectives stepped in. Badges on their belts. No nonsense on their faces. "Mr. Vance. Mr. Austin Vance," one of them said. "You're under arrest for bank fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Austin lurched to his feet. "Dad, do something," he hissed. "Tell them." My father didn't move. He watched as the detective pulled out handcuffs. The sound of metal closing around his wrists was louder than any of my memories of him shouting. My mother started yelling about betrayal, about family, about how I was destroying us. The words washed over me like static. I wasn't looking at her. I was looking at Olivia. She stood flattened against the wall, one hand still on her stomach, face completely drained of color. She watched as her boyfriend, her supposed provider, the father of her child, was walked out of the room in cuffs. I walked over to her, reached into my bag and pulled out a brochure I'd picked up from a community center a few days before. It was for a women's shelter that specialized in financial abuse and coercion. "They lied to you too," I said quietly, holding it out. "He doesn't have savings. He doesn't have investments. That nursery? That money? It was stolen from me." She stared at me, then at the pamphlet, then at Austin being pushed through the door. "If you stay, they will drag you under with them," I said. "You don't have to go down for their choices." Tears spilled over onto her cheeks. She closed her fingers around the paper. Then, without looking back at my family, she walked out of the room. I watched the detectives guide my father and my brother away. The echo of the door closing behind them sounded like more than just wood and metal. It sounded like a line being drawn. And as the conference room emptied, as my mother's shouting faded down the hallway, I realized something. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel triumph either. I felt a clean. 6 months have passed since that day. Half a year without a single call, text, or knock on my door from my parents or my brother. 6 months of silence. 6 months of peace. My sunroom is whole again now. I hired a new contractor, someone who understood that this wasn't just an addition. It was the heart of the house. We rebuilt the wall from the studs up. Triple pane glass. Reinforced framing. Radiant heat under the reclaimed tile floor. Then I did what I'd always wanted to do. Turned it into a real greenhouse. Now it's full of life, rare tropical plants arching toward the skylights, climbing vines, pots of herbs, a small citrus tree that somehow thrives even in Denver winters. It's a controlled ecosystem. A space where I decide what gets to grow and what gets cut back. Austin is serving a 3-year sentence in federal prison for fraud and identity theft. My parents lost their house. They sold it to pay for his legal fees and the restitution the court ordered. Last I heard, from someone who still speaks to them, they're renting a small apartment on the edge of town. I don't know the address. I don't intend to. The day after the arrests, I opened my phone, went to my contacts, and deleted the group labeled family. Not blocked. Just gone. Names vanished from my favorites. No more group texts. No more late night, we need to talk, calls popping up out of nowhere. It was a tiny digital gesture that carried more weight than any speech I could have given. They don't occupy space on my screen anymore. Or in my daily life. Sometimes late at night, I think about Olivia. Someone told me she moved back to Ohio to be near her own parents. I don't know if that's true, but I hope she's safe. I hope she's raising her child somewhere far away from the constant swirl of chaos my family creates. If she hates me for how it all went down, I can live with that. I'd rather she hate me from a place of safety than thank me from a prison waiting room. I sit in my rebuilt sunroom now with a cup of tea, watching snow land softly on the glass above and melt into beads. For years, I believed that family was a bill you never finished paying. That biology meant permanent obligation. That love meant debt. That loyalty meant you stood in the path of every bad decision your relatives made and just absorbed the impact. Now, surrounded by things I've grown myself in a space I reclaimed, I finally understand something else. Biology is an accident. Family is a choice. It's the people who respect when you say no, who celebrate your success without trying to claim a piece of it, who don't break into your home and sign your name to their loans. I had to cut away the diseased branches. It hurt. It looked violent from the outside. The stump is still visible if you know where to look. But the tree is finally healthy. It's putting out new growth. Its roots are deep, and its branches are no longer being used as fire. If you had to choose between your peace and your family's never-ending demands, what would you pick? Tell me in the comments. And if stories like this help you feel less alone and a little braver about drawing your own lines, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one.